born?
Born in a town by the name of Mława, M-L-A-W-A, Poland. I would say I had a very happy childhood, thinking back, and to mind comes moments growing up, one brother, one sister. I would say a lower middle class family in terms of financial status, as I can think back. But nothing was lacking in the house in terms of having what we needed and wanted. I remember the beautiful playmates and the friends and school classmates and school friends. Childhood, normal and uneventful, but rather surrounded by a warm family. There was an isolation between Jews and Christians in my hometown, and I try to compare it to what we have here. Jewish boys and girls mixing in an open society with non-Jewish kids. That was not my experience growing up. And we went to Jewish schools, we had our Jewish areas, we had our Jewish synagogues, and frequently, or occasionally at least, being beaten up by a bunch of Christian kids who called me a Christ killer or something of that nature. We grew up in a kind of an isolation as far as the Jewish community is concerned. Pesach was a very joyous occasion. My father sitting at the Seder, really like a king, which is supposed to have a connotation of freedom. And this is the implication when the father leans on the pillows, and the preparation, and the mother and my grandmothers would come to the Seder, both grandmothers. I know that my grandfathers died young, on both sides, before I was born. So the grandmothers came to our home for the Seder. And there were some cousins and uncles and aunts. The preparation, the joy, the beauty of the table. It was an experience of a religious, spiritual nature that nothing can compare. Of course, on the other hand, you have the solemn days, of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, but really this is the holiday that children looked forward to. I remember going to my grandmother's before the holiday. In our days, when you want matzah mel, you go into the store and you bake it. Over there, my grandmother would give me nuts if I would only produce from the matzah mel, so that she can make knedlach and for the goodies for the Passover meals. But the Seder and the entire holiday was one joyous experience. We didn't go to school, and we were free. All we had to do is go to the synagogue and eat and be with the family and go visitations. It is something that cannot be duplicated as much as we try, of course. And we do have, up till this day, Passover is a special season for us in our own home. But I suppose what's lacking is that extended family, in my case, that's not there. And talking about extended family, I recall my son was to be Bar Mitzvah, and he was Bar Mitzvah. And there was no one on my side. Yes, my wife has a brother who was a rabbi too. At that time, his grandfather and grandmother were alive, from my wife's side. But there was no one from my family that joined. Talking about that, I never discussed it with my son. Never did he discuss with me, which, thinking back now, I suppose I wanted to. I cannot explain why I didn't, but all kinds of. Did I want to protect myself, not reliving it? I doubt it. I don't think this is the reason. But the fact is that moments of this sort, it's a Passover, or it's a Bar Mitzvah, or a wedding, you're alone. Not quite, we hope, but loneliness has various aspects to it. I remember after liberation, I suffered probably more from the loneliness and the isolation, more than during the Holocaust period. And I thought about it the other day, and I suppose it has to do with the fact that after life around you seems to be normal, but you are abnormal. Well, why? In concentration camps and labor camps, there was a preoccupation with survival, preoccupation with being thrown around and how can I make the next day. But then after what was called liberation, actually the realization of liberation was not vivid with me, was not real with me for a long time. But I remember during the years 45, 46, 47, even up to 48, I would find myself crying, and quite frequently, and feeling that there's no one around me that cares what I do or what I don't do. And many other aspects to it that I suppose has to do with loneliness. A feeling of, yes, I'm alive, but that's it. The rest doesn't matter. You're in the midst of a fire burning, and still there was a kind of a denial. I will overcome.
Do you remember thinking that, or is that a thought now?
Yeah, I remember thinking that. It's not as bad, somehow God will help. Not recognizing that God helps those who help themselves. Looking at it from an historical perspective. Although, on the other hand, one may ask, did they really have much of a choice? Which is another area. It's a bit complex as I see it. It's not as... Yes, historically one can say Israel came into being because finally Jews got together and decided they want to do something about it instead of waiting for God to create it for them. The question is whether that chance would they have had if they had done it, let's say, 200 years before that? Would they still succeed in creating what they did? Was it a question also of the political timing was more ripe in one action than another? Nobody will ever know. But the fact is that in my circles, a dependency on faith, I mean a lot of faith, and God will help, was a part of the psyche that I was familiar with, that I identified with. There were bad times, we had bad times, there may be bad times, there will be bad times, somehow God will help out. The German army, with their troops and their power, was self-evident right away, with their all was mechanized. It wasn't on foot as the Polish army was mostly, but rather the force was evident. To our pleasant surprise at the moment was that the first contact with German soldiers was rather a pleasant one.
In what way?
They did not bother us as Jews. On the contrary, they would come into the house, they would ask for drinks, they would offer them drinks, and all the fear that we had accumulated for the Germans to come in the first few days, we didn't sense any. And I think this was by design, I would say, that the troops were not to be involved in any of the Gestapo and any of the SS objectives and aims. They had to do their job, to be friendly to the to leave a sense of security. At least this is the way I interpret it, that the people should not to be frightened. It was only a few days after, when they settled in the hometown, they arrested the rabbi of the community.
They, meaning who?
German Gestapo. He was arrested with a number of prominent citizens, and not knowing what's going to happen, and they announced that if any Jew does anything wrong, these are going to be shot to death. So here is a frightening thing. Then after a few days, they let them go, and making them responsible for a number of laws which they instituted immediately after that. Not all at once. One that every Jew must register. Every Jew must have a number. Later on, a Jew must carry must have a white. First was a white round sign that he's a Jew on the front and the back. Later on, it was changed to a yellow. Later on, an announcement was made that a Jew must walk, if he sees a German, must go off the sidewalk and must go in the middle of the street. A Jew must take off his hat when he sees a German. German has the right to call on any Jew anytime for work, any kind of work he wants to. And then supposedly through the representatives, which ultimately became the Judenrat, they issued laws that every Jew, 200 Jews, every day, every 200 Jews must appear in the marketplace for Germans to come in the morning to pick out people to work.
Who chose the 200 men?
Pardon?
Who chose the 200 men?
Okay, so then this developed into a numbers. First it was by numbers. Numbers so and so must appear. That almost immediately became a source of income for some, as strange as it may seem. If someone didn't want to appear, he would ask me if I wanted to go for him. He would pay me for a day's work. In my case, my father managed to save some of his merchandise, and he was able to have to carry on throughout that period. Although he was caught one day and disappeared, with all of us going crazy, I remember my mother practically risked her life, pleading with the German authorities there in the city hall to try to send him back to find out where he is. No avail. To no avail. Except after a month he came back. My father was never the same.
Where had they sent him?
He never talked about it. Obviously it was a labor camp of some sort. He needed him for harvesting the potatoes or whatever it was. So he worked very hard there. They cut his beard. And he became a different person. While I knew him to be the dynamic, all-knowing, strong, he became very much reserved. Since then, although he took well care of his family, there were 5 of us. My two grandmothers moved in with us, and one cousin of ours, so we were 8. And we stayed in the apartment. He managed to do business secretly against the law with people who came in to buy things, and they would knew him, customers who knew him before. So he was able to sell some of the merchandise and provide for his family. Food at that time, it was bad. When we look back, it was great. It was good. It was good. The family was together. And there was a feeling, well, it's a war, the war will be over, and there was no inclination, no idea of no question about survival. I mean, it's a question of hard times. This is the Sabbath day. It was the first time I had to work on the Sabbath. And since, of course, they gave us some food, but since it wasn't kosher, I wouldn't eat. Of course, I got smarter later, unfortunately. But to me, it was a trauma of the worst kind. Being rather a sheltered young man, that was very traumatic. But thinking back of what happened afterwards, things were not so bad. So okay, so I was beaten up. So what? Talking about beating up, I'll never forget the first time I was beaten up, and that really got to me. Not so much the pain from the beating, but the mental anguish. Instead of telling me how to put bricks together, I had to be placed in a certain way in order for them to be stuck up, and he simply went over and beat me for it without knowing why. And I couldn't even cry when I came home. This is when I burst out crying. I mean, animal. They asked all Jews to appear in the marketplace there, and there were already trucks there to be putting us on, and all of a sudden it stopped and they sent us back home. What happened, I don't know. Some thought that there was a German high officer passed by and he told them to stop it. There was a lot of crying, I remember, and this is incidentally the first time I saw my father cry. There were all of us standing together, embraced, and he just burst out crying. He just lost his sense of being a father, caring for a family, that he has no power to protect his family. I remember I was still studying with the rabbi of the town. Privately, we would meet daily. Secretly, we would study. And that night before, one of the leaders of the Judenrat came to tell the rabbi there that he just spoke with the authority there to tell everybody everything's going to be fine. And the following morning, my mother's on a Friday again. My mother used to get up very early on Fridays, prepare for the Sabbath. She would go to the bakery in the morning and start preparing, and she came back and she said, woke everybody up. That's it. Well, there are Germans all over town, and it's impossible to go out without being stopped. So she backed off and came back. We lived a bit outside of the town, and we were standing all dressed, and my two grandmothers with us, and my cousins. There were 8 of us, each one with ready to go, and we were hoping maybe they will not see us. We didn't know what's happening outside. So then we saw a Polish kid was telling the Germans, here are Jews. So they came up with dogs and whips, whipped us out, really. Something happened again, which is buried, but when you talk that particular morning, it comes to mind so vividly. My father was holding on to his mother. She couldn't run as fast as the rest of us. And I looked back, and I was in the street. It was snowing. And here he was holding on to his mother, and dogs attacked him, with a German whipping him, and his mother on the floor, on the ground, and him not wanting to go. Eventually we were running, and we were taken to a place, was like a high school sports place. And there were thousands of us there, and we finally looked for each other. We found my father there crying, missing his mother. The rest of us were waiting, and after some time they wheeled my grandmother to the group too on a wagon. That group consisted of about 7,000. All the Jews from the town, well, I cannot say, most of us were there in that place. Obviously, they decided to create a ghetto there. And they decided the ghetto should be only about 3,000, 3,500 Jews. Remaining, and the rest of us must be evacuated. So my family together was evacuated to a. First, we were taken to a small village not far from my hometown. We stayed there for about 10, 11 days. With a terrible humiliation. I mean, those things are forgotten. We were in barracks there, sleeping on a bunch of straw. Feeding was once a day. Humiliation of the worst kind. I mean, I just couldn't deal. I remember, I just couldn't deal with the whole thing. But 11 days we were there, and after that we were put on trains in 3 groups. There were about 3,000 of us, about 1,000 in 3 different communities, into Poland proper, which is now the Polish Protectorate. My group came to a town by the name of Lubartov, near Lublin.
Mm-hmm.
It was after a 2 days travel, I guess. We arrived there on a Wednesday, I remember. The Jewish community there dealt with now 1,000 refugees, marvelously. They assigned us to different homes. 3 children, one place with a dentist, I remember. My cousin in a different place, my father and his mother in one place, and my mother and her mother in a different place. The following day we got together and my grandmother died at night. Sitting on my mother's lap, there was no room there to put her, so she didn't feel good, so she's on a chair of this type. They sat together and hugged each other, and she just expired. But she was buried that same day, and looking back, I suppose she merited to be buried like a human being. And 2 days later, my other grandmother died on a Friday. At that time, there were 2 other friends of mine went together, and we were caught traveling by train. Of course, they knew, I'm sure, that we were coming back against the law, and they put us in a labor camp.
Where?
In my hometown. Some relatives of mine had been in the ghetto. Now, by that time, there was a ghetto there. When they heard that I was in the prison, there in the city, town prison, labor camp, which was turned into a labor camp. I remember they tried to make contact with me. They succeeded in making contact. I remember that it was on Friday. When I saw them at the gates, they were probably given permission to see me. It was a very emotional meeting. They brought me some food. This was Friday. The Friday meant very special to me. And they brought me a challah. All the emotions, what happened to the whole thing, This is my hometown where this was a special day, a special evening, special food. Here I am, May 28th, so at the end of May, I was liberated from that labor camp back into the ghetto. Then I felt this is good. I mean, people knew me and people knew my family. They could work for me. They got some clothes for me already. I was wearing the same clothes for 3 months or more. I remember the buttons of my coat had been ripped off, and I was going around with a piece of rope holding my coat together. They gave me new clothes, and started really getting work, and I worked, and I saved some money. I don't remember what I ate or didn't eat altogether. I wanted to save money to get my family back in here. And that summer I succeeded to get my mother and brother. I don't remember how I got money to them, how I smuggled, get people. There was some smuggling going on there. And they got my money and some letters, and my mother and brother, younger brother, managed to come to the ghetto. Of course, the ghetto, and my sister, as I mentioned before, had decided no, she must stay with her father. How they survived, I don't know. You mentioned Passover before. I remember meeting my mother. She told us about the Seder. In between there was Passover. I remember that Passover too. I was in that other labor camp. But my mother described to me that Passover without me. My father I didn't know where I was. There was no way of communicating to them that I'm alive, that I'm where. And my father was simply carrying on at that Seder, morning after sun. So this is when my mother lost time. It was November 9th on a Tuesday, I guess. She was sad. She was worried. She was angry. Cried. Well, that was it. I guess that camp I tried to find out where that transport went, possibly Treblinka. There was one, I forgot his name. He wrote The Destruction of European Jewry. Hilberg. I checked with Hilberg. He claims that transport, he did a lot of study in that subject, went to Auschwitz. I don't know. Some reason I didn't think so. Because no one of that transport survived, just no one. A week later, my brother and I had to appear. It was on the Tuesday also, the week after. We spent the night there in a mill, and the following day we were put on trains and ended up in Auschwitz. On Thursday night, November 20th, I believe it was, 19th or 20th. My brother and I were together, and he was separated from me, not knowing where we are or what this is. Of course, later on, I learned that he went to the crematorium, gas chamber, that night. As far as my father and sister is concerned, that same month, we received a card from her saying in a postcard, in kind of a secret language, the gist of it was that we don't know what's going to happen. What we was able to gather is that the same month there was a liquidation of many other places throughout Poland. That's November 42. I was lucky. Of the transport of 2,000, 500 went to Auschwitz I. Of the 500, it seems about 150 or so young people, my age group, were taken into a Maurerschule. That was a school for masons of how to become bricklayers. What that intention was, I know, simply speaking, I suppose they wanted to get the benefit of young people who can still build and serve their purpose. For me, it was lucky because, although at times I didn't think I was lucky, but I wished I would be the other side. But the fact that I spent that winter within the confines of the buildings without going out to work. At least that's the way I see it. It gave me a chance to adjust to a different, to the environment and the whole bit of concentration camp life. And the fact is that this number, 76,300, the 76,000 was a group of people from my hometown, and were taken to that camp. Probably, we never made this. Proportionally, probably more of us survived from that group than from any other group. And there was a group of us, 76,000, that we still know of each other. We spent the winter there. By the spring, we were pushed out to work, of course. And that was life in concentration camp to continue until January 18, 1945. Even later on, up 1945, when I was taken to Buchenwald later on after January 1945, I remember praying, going to and from work. What comes to mind is one day one of the inmates in Auschwitz noticed that I am praying, and he came over to me. He was an elderly gentleman. He identified himself, and he told me that he comes from a series of concentration camps before Auschwitz. He was a German Jew who was arrested in the 1930s, being accused of being a communist, and he was imprisoned. But by the time he was to be free from prison, the law was that any Jew who is not to go out from prison, but to rather be sent in concentration camp. And he told me that he was actually an atheist, but in prison, being there isolated, alone, he gave it a lot of thought, and he became attracted to religion. So he asked me if I could say some prayers with him, which we did. He in turn had another friend, a young friend, also from Germany, and the three of us formed a kind of a friendship. Whenever we would work together, we would stand and mix the cement, or carry the cement, or carry the coals, and he would say with me some of the prayers. I would share some thoughts that I remembered by heart, of classic statements in there. So it seems that I was non-questioning, at least not heavily, to the point of I was legitimate to do, even from I understand it now. But I suppose the idea of faith was so much ingrained in me. There was a kind of a second nature of mine. That was even when I was in Carvinkel, which was a terrible, terrible experience towards the end, much worse than Auschwitz. I still remember, at that time, I guess it was getting to a point of resignation from what happened afterwards. But I still find myself reciting the Mincha service, going to work, But this was that kept me going, possibly, I don't know. Some who didn't have that kind of faith and still survived. Many who had more faith than I did, I'm sure, and did not survive. There's no rhyme or reason, no explanation of why one survived and the other did not. 2 days later, we were sent to a Ordruf camp, which is in the outskirts of Buchenwald. From Ordruf, we went to Carvinkel. And by the end of January, I was in Carvinkel, which was a horrifying experience. Yeah. It was in the Thüringen Mountains. We had to drill for bunkers there. It was very hard work. Food was much less than in Auschwitz. The living conditions much less. You see, Auschwitz I was very clean. If one wanted to keep himself clean, it was ideal. I would go up when 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. I would wash myself in cold water, and it was really, for me, it was a good thing. It was sanitary there, but not Carvinkel. was filthy, and food was, and I felt that I'm getting weaker by the day. Going to and from work was a long distance by walking. I remember being painful. My joints started to ache. By the beginning of April, that camp was obviously becoming closer to the Americans coming from the West. We were sent back to Buchenwald. That too took a few days of marching and bombing, I believe, scattering ourselves into the forests. I remember coming to Buchenwald. Talk was that this camp is going to be blown up. Is it good to go out with the transport or to remain? Although it wasn't our decision to be made anyway, but we never knew what's good. And it turns out I was taken out April 10th from Buchenwald, and April 11th that camp was liberated. I checked with Eli Wiesel, who was liberated in that camp, and yes, it was so. April 11th he was liberated. And between April 10th and my liberation, I went through, which was within 3-4 weeks, I probably suffered more than in the years before physically. I remember being on trains, on cattle trains, with losing my strength. I remember my breathing was becoming very heavy. I can see myself, picture myself as having my, as I've seen others in the last days of their lives, reaching a point where I didn't even want to go down from the train because you had to jump down from a cattle train, which is high, in order to get some food or whatever. I just didn't want to go down there too, just too much of an effort. Just wanted to be left alone, lie there. This is when I have a blackout of my memory. I remember vaguely coming to a place where I was disinfected, and again a blackout completely. That must have been Theresienstadt, because when I came to, I found myself in a hospital in Theresen under the Russians. I would cry a lot. Just anything. If you would talk to me, just talk to me, I would start crying. Why? Because, and I said to myself, is it true that you're talking to me? Why should you talk to me? That's probably not true. There was a whole confusion around the whole thing of existence. Obviously, at least in my way of thinking, that they got us to, at least they got me to think of myself so little that nobody should talk about to me. What this does, it takes years. And again here, if I may interject the religious thought, is the idea that there's a great deal of potential in a human being that it can put himself up even with his own bootstraps. Of course, I met my wife, it was just marvelous. We were married rather soon, right after, and I look back and said, how dared I? How dared I?
You met her in Italy?
Yeah, no, I met her here in the United States. How dared I? And I was married almost as soon as I came here. I came in 1948. I was married in 1948. Well, one would analyze, well, this is loneliness, I suppose, possibly. For me, it worked. My son was born in 1950, but I can tell you, I was not well mentally. By mentally, I mean I wasn't crazy. I wasn't doing anything outlandish. At least I don't think so. But my inside was, definitely still is, scarred in many ways. I can tell you, of course, there have been some, not issues, but rather difficulties between my son and myself, not in the sense of becoming hostile to each other, but not the kind of relationship you would, that I would want to see. And I noticed it during his high school years. He's a brilliant young man. He's an attorney now. He was a good, excellent student. He went to Brandeis, graduated magna cum laude, if I may. be proud of. But looking back, I missed, and I miss it terribly now, the fact that I was too busy and he wanted more of me. And I wasn't there. Now, which is it? Is it fair to come close to him? Is it wanting to be normal, so much so that I immerse myself in my work, all kinds of hours? Or what? But I suppose these are some of the scars that I mentioned before that are with us. And I suppose we'll be buried with them. Trying, I hope that I can make a change if I may share personal feelings that I've been the last couple of years. Maybe I should change my position so that I can spend more time with my son. Whatever years is left, and simply try to make up lost years.